from the Nutrient Pest Management Program here at the University of Wisconsin. Everybody hearing me? Yes, I see Sarah said yes, so that's good enough to me. All right, thank you everybody. Today what I'm talking about is really developing assessment protocols and how we gather data and what we need for this. And it's going to give you a background of a few different things. Some of the previous programs that we've done, and for the students, some of your reading material you'll see was a little bit old, but I really wanted to lay the foundation about how these kind of programs started and why it's valid. But I also want to talk about the new programs and using some examples of the work groups that are going to be done in this class. Let's sit and talk about the NISA approach. And I think you heard a little bit about this last week. I know the growers on the line, and when they listen to this on YouTube, this is going to be a repeat for them. But this is really what we want to talk about. This NISA initiative is a National Initiative for Sustainable Agriculture. It's grower-led and it's growers at the table. Really what we're stressing is it's producer-led, that they actually are the ones that are helping develop the system. Research-based. This is key, research-based. I don't think we probably need to take all the notes. I guess this is going to be on YouTube somewhere, but and if the students need it, I can get you the slide set as well. Regionally appropriate. Every region, I was just talking to the students in the rice group and emphasizing this, but every region has benefits, concerns, are advanced in some areas, might need some help in other areas, but it's very regionally appropriate. It's balanced. It's not just going to put all the onus on the back of the farmers. It's actually going to be balanced up along the supply chain. It's going to encompass more than just environmental concerns. It's going to have the economics back to the grower. It's going to have the social message as well. Documented improvements. This is really what I want to stress today. You can't say anything good if you can't document it, and you can't show change over time. And then how we can communicate the message. So these are all just kind of the key tenets of the NISA approach. And that's when we're developing a research-based protocol, we want to make sure that these all fit within that NISA initiative. The NISA approach, this is kind of the saying that we use in some of the publication material, but NISA represents producers who have the experience and the on-the-ground knowledge and ability to implement practices which pursue desired sustainability outcomes. A lot of times it's easy for people up the supply chain in Washington, D.C., even at ivory towers at Wisconsin and others, as we'd like to say it's real easy to do something, or we can really make effective change by saying that this is something that everybody should be doing on the ground. But the truth is it's the growers that know what's doable, what's acceptable, what can be profitable, and what kind of practices can be on the ground done. And they're the ones that are going to make the changes. So we need to work with them to be able to do it. As the NISA approach says, we are the farmers, I'm not the farmer, but they are the farmers, and they need to be part of the discussion. I think this is very important that if they're not part of the discussion, they're not going to have a hard time being part of the solution, and they want to be part of the solution, and that's the key. They need to be in there. Remember that the farmers are actually the ones that are taking the economic risk. I get a paycheck every month no matter what. They don't necessarily. They get paid as their outcomes and stuff, so you need to make sure that the risk is valuable to them and they're going to get a return. Now when we develop the sustainability tools, this is really what I want to talk about today. And maybe the gentlemen in the room don't get this quite as much, but style and substance is really what you hear all the time when you're trying to do something fancy. And the key to me is for us, when we're developing a real protocol, it has to have substance over style. It's got to have some basis to it, some research basis. It can be fancy and look good, but if it has no substance behind it, there's not going to be any value to it. And a lot of the programs that are happening now nationally are not based on substance or research or validity or on-the-ground proof. They're based on some thoughts or theories or practices that some people think are beneficial and might not have that substance behind it. So we really want to push that substance is what we want to look for. Why is this important? I'll give you an example of importance of substance in data. We're working on a soybean program right now. We're calling it the NSSI, National Sustainable Soybean Initiative, not to be confused with NISA, the NISA. But the first meeting I went to with this group of growers, we were down in Chicago. We had Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio growers all at the table. And the one thing that really struck me is one of the growers at the table said, soybeans from, it was another country, it happened to be Brazil, was the term they used, are more sustainable than the soybeans in the United States. And there was people from the European Union that really believed that. And we could just use that statement for anything. Soybeans from any XYZ area you could say are more sustainable than something from the United States. How could that be said? The reason they were saying that is Brazil had a documented program. Didn't have research substance behind it, but they were starting to document practices. And the industry had that in place. So how could it be said the industry had a system in place to document the farm? Whether it was valid or not, they were documenting it, and they were going to be able to document over time. We need this data from growers in the United States to develop this type of baseline. And that was an example of soybeans, but this is for any type of cropping system. If you don't have the data, you can't show the difference over time. This kind of data could be used to refute such claims or other on-farm data for verification. We actually want to show what the growers are doing. And the truth is the soybean growers over time have made tremendous improvements, whether it be in their tillage practices, their pesticide use, their economic returns, various things, social aspects on the farm. But those weren't being documented and being able to communicate. One of the keys to this, though, we don't want to pit grower against grower or region against region. As I said a moment ago, every region is going to have benefits. Every region is going to have some more concerns. That doesn't mean that one particular region is better than another. It means that they're dealing with and managing their resources wisely within that region. And the other regions will be dealing with and managing their resources wisely within that region. So the point is to highlight those benefits, look at it, look where some of the concerns are, and let's develop some research basis so that we can move growers along those to help them in that way. I know Jed showed something similar to this last week, but this is a little more detailed when I look at this of the various tiers of agricultural sustainability. And this is something that as NISA is starting to look at is that there's going to be levels of participation in sustainability. I'm going to talk about a couple of different tier programs we did, and I know the reading assignment is going to be more in that tier 2 thing. But again, when we talk about tier 1, I hope you guys can see well. It's actually kind of small on the screen, but this is what we would consider the entry-level sustainability assessment process. This would be kind of the, how do we engage the masses of the growers? Where are we going to get the most bang for our buck? This is a way to provide a mechanism for producers to begin assessing their level of sustainability. Let's get a baseline. Let's begin that process. It's really what growers are initially willing and able to do. It's not going to ask intrusive questions. It's going to be simple enough. It's not going to put any of their trade secrets out there. Nothing like that, but it should be something they're able to do. This will allow us to establish a baseline for grower and expose those growers to all the aspects of sustainability. A lot of times you just want to talk about sustainability, people are thinking environmental aspects, because that's the main key buzzwords, but there's other things. And if growers aren't getting a return on their investment, they're not making money. It doesn't matter how good they are sustainability-wise because they're not going to be around. It's like anybody else. You've got to make money to stay there. You've got to manage your land. You've got to have your community involved. And this kind of baseline assessment can encourage grower change over time. The next level up would be using some kind of model or regional or national scale, putting some limits on what the growers are able to do, having some certification. Might require some specific farm data, can vary each year depending on external factors. This is one reason models are really tough for me, because you could look really good one year and then you have something like the drought like we had last summer and you're going to look really bad the next year, and it's of no fault of your own. It is totally external factors. And those things are only as good as the models can predict or the outcomes, but this would be a higher level up, smaller percentage of growers would do something like that. The tier 3 is the more detailed, science-based, very on-farm test to verify the models and outcomes. This would be actually going onto your farm and making sure that those models are true and right. Researchers working with growers to ensure these outcomes are right. Determining the risk assessment of the practices and models and seeing the risk shared from the value chain. Now the reason I wanted to show you this, and I know Jed showed almost exactly the same thing, but these tiers last week, is what he said. We're looking at how do we engage the masses of the growers. They all know about sustainability. They're hearing about it. They know it's out there. They're interested. They want to be sustainable, but they don't want to be forced to be sustainable. They want to be working with us to be sustainable. So how do we develop a system, and how can there be other systems up there? So again, it's a way to document what these different tiers of sustainability are out there. If we're looking at the baseline protocol approach, and this is what I was saying, this would be the baseline protocol approach. What the growers are able to provide now. Let's not ask them things that they don't have or they can't answer, because you're not going to be able to get very far. If it takes them 8 hours to gather that data or to find that data or to tell you exactly how much fuel is on used on every specific field, those kind of things, you're not going to get that answer, because they're just going to say, it's too much time, I don't want to do that. Should not be intrusive to growers. As I said, it should be something fairly simple. It should not give away any trade secrets. I don't want to know specifically what keeps them competitive in the marketplace. I want to know stuff that we can use as an industry to communicate the message. I don't want to know specifically one grower against another what some of these things are. Should be simple, quick, and not take a lot of time or farmer staff time. The way that we've been setting up a lot of these entry-level protocol programs is it should take between 20 to 40 minutes to fill out all this kind of survey. That might even be too long. We're actually talking about now, can we get that down even farther? How can we make sure that the protocol, though, is good enough that we can get that data back and it means something? I don't want somebody to sit down even if it only takes 20 minutes if it's not going to be of value to them or us. We don't need it that way. We need it to make sure that it's got value and it's something that can be used. This is a key, I think. It should provide value back to growers when all the data is combined. What the industries need are ability to look at where they are and critically see where they are right now, where they have been, and where they're going. So it has to have value to them. They have to be able to see, here's where we're succeeding at, here's where we need a little more work, here's our challenges, here's our risks, various things like that. And we need that in an aggregate form. So as I said, I don't need to know one specific farmer against another. I want to look at that aggregate form, and I want to be able to have those industries really find value in it. And then a grower be able to get back and get value in that. We need to help sell the positive messages and changes in agriculture. This is one of the reasons growers are really looking at being part of the discussion and at the table. Industry now is very good at selling their message. If you look at Johnson Controls in the state, or even Miller Breweries, all these things, they're talking about what they've done to reduce their water use, reduce their electrical use. Even Walmart talks about changing their light bulbs, all these things. The industry has gotten very good at measuring, documenting, and selling what they're changing along the sustainability criteria. Agriculture has not done that. Agriculture has changed. It's doing a lot of things better, more efficient, managing their resources better, but they haven't had the data and they haven't been able to, in an aggregate, sell that message or really communicate that. And that's what we need to do. An important thing about this data, and this is as the students are working in the work group that I really want to emphasize as well, is this data should fit into the supply chain needs so the system can be used to comply with all needs. A grower doesn't want to take even 20 minutes to fill out something if he has to turn around and take another 20 minutes to fill out something to sell to Cisco, another 20 minutes to fill out to sell to Walmart, another hour to sell to McCain's, all these other things. We're trying to encompass this so that this kind of data can be all under one umbrella. And that's important. So as you're looking at the systems, this is a question that I think is very important. Who needs this data? Why? What are they asking for? Various things like that. That's something to look at. And as I said, this is kind of the same thing. Should streamline needs of the other assessment to ease the documentation for growers. There's what the supply chain needs. There's also what the state regulations might require, what national things might require. The ag census, there's various things that you got to look at if you're looking at it from a grower's perspective. Let's try to streamline all these into one so that we're getting the data out, they're getting the data out, but then it's also helping them reduce their workload for staff and office time. This is an example of some of the things that we've done so far, these NISA sustainability tools. We've worked on various crops and looking at gathering data for various systems. This one here is the soybean one specifically. Yeah, and I was going to see if any of the soybean growers, but they're not. But basically the soybean one right now is a whole farm cash green system. It's a soybean system. They go through and it's a checklist type system. And we've done the soybean ones in groups of growers that we've seen anywhere from about 25 to 45 minutes depending on it. A lot of it is because they start talking to their neighbors, so it takes them a little longer to fill it out. But basically general questions, the farm rotations, what practices do you do to limit compaction, various things you go through. And we'll talk more about some of the specific questions in a minute. If we look at these, again, the protocol is written to harmonize standard questions from other tools, trying to bring this all under one so that they don't have to fill out multiple things. One of the key is to work with specialists, the research specialists, to create research-based best management practices for the, in this case, it was soybeans for the Midwest region. They have substance. There's research basis to it. I'll talk to you in a few minutes about where you can find some of that substance. But let's not ask them a question because there's something that we don't really know is valid. It needs to be reviewed by growers, the industry, the processors, and the researchers to ensure the sustainability needs. Now, I don't think we're going to make you do that here. We don't have time or effort, but to really get a valid kind of sustainability program, it needs to be reviewed by all those people. It has to have the substance behind it, and everybody. Okay, I was just reading the question that's up there. I guess that came from Eileen. But anyways, it has to have that sample. Here's an example of the research substance, and this actually comes from the soybean one. For the soybean model, individual specialists evaluates the questions to align them with the current outcome-based decision tools. For example, all the fertility and soil management questions were derived from SNAP Plus, which is a program here in Wisconsin used to determine their nutrient management planning. That model incorporates soil loss predictions from Russell 2, which is a model that I'm sure you'll hear about next week with them coming in, and nutrient management planning for the requirements for the state of Wisconsin. All these kind of things that incorporate all this research, this modeling behind it, are probably incorporated into 3 to 4 questions. But that's my point. There's things behind it that actually mean something. If you ask the questions correctly and you're going to get the right data, we're going to be able to deduce some of these research things on the next level. Here's another example, and this is a little older example, but I think something that was used when I first started working in potatoes, and this is actually Jeff Wyman and Walt Stevenson who did this kind of things. But this is, again, how do you relate these kind of data and protocol to research? Some of the things you read this week were actually built off of this kind of research, where they looked at foliar, fungicide, and insecticide potato programs up in Coloma, Wisconsin. Andy Dirks was here the first week. It was on his farm. Looking at conventional pesticide materials versus reduced risk, looking at the toxicity units and all that. Bottom line, they found out that they were not only effective, but they were cost effective for growers. They were actually going to make money by using these if they were used in the right way at the right timing. Again, there was the research behind it so that you can develop those kind of questions that it's real. Some of the sustainability tools that are out there that were being written right now or in use are bio-IPM books. The picture up in the upper right there is a bio-IPM book for potato. It's something that we wrote here through the Extension Service and through our program in the Nutrient Pest Management on a seasonable approach to potatoes, so going from pre-planting all the way to post-harvest and what you would do. All these extension pubs. This is an example of a IPM perspective for carrot foliar disease. That's a fairly new one, written, I think, in the last year. All this research-based material. These are where you need to start. A lot of that stuff for rice isn't going to be here in Wisconsin, but they will have this kind of material as well. Onions, you will still have some more in Wisconsin, but places to look. IPM strategic plans. This is something on the IPM Center, and this one is the North Central IPM Center, but the IPM Centers are something that's run that have these things called IPM strategic plans. Here you can go through and you can look at all the specific crops and then the crops by region. For example, apples has Michigan and California. Go through and actually start looking at this, finding out what is out there for the crops you're working on. Use it as a starting point to see what the research out there is and to see what some of the regional differences are. Again, let's look at the various tiers of sustainability and talk about some of the differences in programs. One of the programs I'm going to talk about, and this is the program that I've been working on for a while, is the Healthy Grown Potato Program. And this is kind of the start of some of the sustainability work here at Wisconsin. That's why I wanted to talk about it real quick. This is one crop in one state, Wisconsin potatoes. The way we started it, it was grower-driven. We had an advisory committee that was almost entirely growers at the table with environmental groups, with the industry, with some of the salespeople at the table, and the researchers at the table. The program was very research-based. The stuff I just showed you from Jeff had research validity behind it. It was researched on the farm. Actually, the three of us probably did some of our graduate research that helped develop some of this stuff on the potato program. So it's something that there was a lot of different research out there to show it. Developed under ecosystem-friendly practices. Now, this was an idea that they wanted to develop some kind of marketplace incentive for it, so they wanted to have a high bar criteria or some minimum requirements behind it. So this is more than just an entry-level sustainability program. It had a cap on the pesticide toxicity or a limit on the amount of pesticides that could be used. There was some prohibited materials. Again, this is kind of that next level up. It was and still is today being independently certified. It has an auditor that comes out once a year and works with the growers. And the idea was that there was going to be some return to the growers. This is really where the key those go. If we look at it, they've been certified since 2002. And if we look at this graph here, shows you the increase in IPM scores over time and decrease in pesticide toxicity or pesticide risk. Pesticide toxicity is basically a number that gives you a risk to both the human and environmental risk to the system. Basically, about 10% of the industry did this, and over that time and over the years, we saw a 52% increase in the ecosystem-friendly practices, or these bio-IPM practices, these sustainability-type practices, wildlife practices out there, 30% reduction in pesticide toxicity, national recognition, a green perception. They actually did some ecosystem work. They've expanded now that they're working with a lot of people in botany and the Nelson Institute to do some on-farm restoration activities for their ecosystem. And basically, because of this, Wisconsin potatoes now has the green perception state. So a lot of other states out there. It's been great for education. The growers involved have found out that the best thing that they've gotten out of the involvement has been the education and interaction with the researchers, with the industry, with the environmental groups, stuff like that. So this program started back in 2000. Actually, when I started working on it, it was well before sustainability was a word, or a known word to the crowd. Before green was really popular, it was a concept that some of the growers had, that we can do things differently and we can document it. And if you look at that graph and you look at the documentation, the growers have gotten a big bang for their buck. Not maybe in their pocketbook economically, but they've gotten a big bang for their buck in other intrinsic values by being able to document this type of work over time. And that's the key there, is that they can actually show improvement over time. Now, there were drawbacks to this program. There's no question about that. The certification was expensive. It failed to generate a big expected grower payback. It was probably ahead of its time. I look at it now, there's a lot more programs like this that are working out there. Potatoes are not a sexy crop to try to sell under a high value type thing. It's not something that you would normally think of as a differentiated crop. But 10 years plus later, Wisconsin producers are still doing this program. They're still finding value. They're gaining some access and a perceived price premium based on their sustainability. Now, I mean that by price premium for the whole state, not necessarily for the certified products, but the whole state feels like they're getting value back for it because of this sustainability perception and this way that they've documented it over time. So again, this is a little bit of that higher bar, but it gives you an example of what some of the programs might want to do or where they want to go and how that might do it. So is high bar certification for everyone? No, definitely not, and I don't think that we should think of it that way. Even I think some of the growers in the state think that there might be some other options like this entry-level sustainability system that we're talking about today. Supply chain does not want to pay for this. This has been loud and clear. This has come back at many, many national meetings and stuff, and we're looking at agricultural systems, larger scale agricultural systems that are looking at how they can fill this sustainability niche. And quite frankly, a lot of their supply chains just don't want to pay for it. So it's not going to generate a return on investment for all. But it can help the growers, and there can be other values back to them. And we did see that in the Healthy Grown program, that there's been other perceived values back to them. Initially, there was some savings in cost. Now it's there's this perception that they get. So how can we get growers at the table and still get this value back? How can the sustainability still be valuable? Well, I think a lot of the growers know if they're not going to be working on a sustainability system, they're not going to be around in 5 or 10 years because that's where everything is going. But if we look at this, we go back to the level 1. Let's look at current NISA approaches. Some of the NISA models that we've worked on right now, and some of them that we have protocols for, are for whole farm level. We've got cash grain, vegetables, fruits, and there's some in animal ag. In the grain end, we've got actually I should have taken that out. I guess corn is not going to be happening in class. We talked originally about corn, but it's not happening. It's just soybeans right now, but I think corn is something we're going to be working on real shortly here. In vegetables, we've got a very large processed vegetable program that we're looking at right now, which is snap beans and sweet corn. Also have potatoes at the level. The processing industry has been very proactive in gathering this data and is actually very interested in it. It's not only the growers, it's the processors involved in realizing the supply chain needs. In fruit, cranberries and strawberries are a couple of the crops involved. And in animal, which is started here in Wisconsin, run by a couple of people that are on the other end of the call right now, it includes the pork, dairy, beef, poultry, and chicken. Where is this going? Some of the sustainability tools, we've got various examples you can look at, but I put the mint one up here, which Katie had helped work in. But we need these to help develop and use as baseline data. Some example of those are cranberry and mint tools that were done. And this mint one was just finished I think earlier in January here. But it starts getting that message out. It starts helping that communicating the message of where we are. There's data being gathered for soybean and processing vegetable right now, but it's not just being gathered for nothing. It's actually being looked at and analyzed and put somewhere. Here's an example of the cranberry data insight. It's similar to the mint one, but you can actually look at the survey results. Cranberry had done data from where they were previous years, and then in 2009 all the way up, but they were able to see what growers have changed over time. And this is the key to it. If you're asking the right questions, we can show some of this over time. So what's some of the things that you might put down? What are some of the ideas of how you might develop a protocol? The way we've looked at them right now is to develop them on a whole farm and then a crop-specific area. This is not saying that you have to do this. This is what we've looked at right now. And the basis for this is really when we started working with growers, even years ago back on the potato program, we kept hearing, well, we manage our farm as a whole. We don't manage it just for potatoes or for soybeans or whatever. You really manage your farm as a whole. So there's some things that we can look at the whole farm level that would just pertain to that. And so that might be general farm production, soil and water, such as nutrient management planning, water quality, quantity measures, scouting. Are we looking for the right pests at the right time? Information gathering, what are they using? Pesticide and fertilizer management decision, pest management approaches, resistance management, ecological restoration. Chain of custody. That basically means, can you know what came from where? A trace back and food safety issues is big, especially in a lot of the vegetables. I think you'll see this when you work in the onion group. That's going to be a big one. But chain of custody would being able to say that you'll know which field goes where and where it was sold. Could you go that way and backwards? Farm operations and sustainability, and that includes the economic aspects, human resources, energy, fuel, social aspects that are out there. You know, why do you farm? How valuable are you in the community, in the church, in the local government, various things. And these things can definitely vary depending on the needs of the growers and supply chain partners, the industry itself, various things. So these are just some ideas of stuff that are out there. Crop-specific examples, production and management, weed management, insect disease management. Others that are appropriate, some storage might be an issue for some. Again, some of the other social aspects might be in there. But just to give you an example, again, these are really checklist type questions that we're looking at. If you take soil samples, what is the composite size of the sample? Now, this might not seem that exciting every 5 acres up to every 40 acres, but from a research basis, if you do some really manage your soils locally, it does have a great value to it. The smaller the sample, the better it is. Do you use a local nutrient source? How long are field records and scouting records kept and used for decision making? One of the things we really want to stress when we're stressing with growers is that the more data you have, the more long-term decisions, the better managers you're going to be, because the more data you've got. Do you attend educational meetings? Pesticide and fertilizer handling. Is the person making applications on your farm a certified applicator? Well, most of the time that answer is going to be yes, but again, it's not something that's been gathered and the public doesn't necessarily know that. So those are things that we can use. Was the spray equipment calibrated before each crop season? How many times? Are you ensuring adequate coverage? Various things like that. These are all examples of just kind of questions that you can go out there and look at. Not necessarily any specific one you've got to use. It just gives you an example of the breadth of the questions. Now, a lot of times there's probably a big chunk of the questions are going to cut across all of agriculture. Probably doesn't matter what crop you're working with. There's a chunk of the questions that are going to be across all of them, especially when you look at some of the social questions. And we'll get to some more specifics at the end. But even with that, it's good to have them specifically if we're going to look at the region specific, because again, even though you've got these groups that cut across all of agriculture, there's still going to be some really important regional and local differences that you need to be out there. Now, how do you gather this data? Once you get to the next section and you've got like a protocol down, that sounds great. We got something on the piece of paper, but how do we actually gather this data? Well, there's various ways to do it. If we look at the soybean sustainability, this is where we started. Coolbean.info is Sean Conley's page he has on campus here. He's a professor of agronomy. And this takes him to an area where it talks about the National Soybean Sustainability Initiative, and you can actually fill out the surveys online there. In theory, it sounds good, not the most effective approach for getting people to do it. So the soybean group has worked in a couple of different ways. We've actually done some face-to-face meetings with the growers where we've just gone and said, fill it out while we're here. And they're at the winter educational meetings. We've gone and had them fill it out, and that was very effective. Illinois just did something where they gave you a little money to fill them out. So there's various ways to do it, but data is being gathered through that. We've done some for the processing vegetables through these small group meetings, direct grower approaches, or industry support, like the processor right now. The way they're gathering data is the processors are going out to each of the individual growers and getting it themselves. That's how they wanted to do it. Various ways to do it. But I think as you're looking at developing this protocol, and you're doing this larger term project for your crops, this is something to think about. Not only do we have this protocol, how are we going to use this data and how are we going to collect this data? Because it's not a simple thing to think that everybody's going to jump on board unless they know there's going to be value back to them. Now, we talked a little bit about the tiered approach of the various things that we can use in agriculture, from the lower level, entry level, up to the higher tier. And there's something that I really want to talk about. Everybody talks about practice-based versus metric-based systems. And I saw that Amanda talked to you a little bit about this last week in your talks. She talked about practice-based versus metric-based. In reality, they're complementary. Everybody wants to talk about that they're separate, that one is more research or metric and another is not. But the truth is they're very complementary. Practices are the linkages between the practices implemented on the farm and the research on the farm to predict some outcome. The metric is a quantitative modeling or measurement tool of practices that actually will predict the outcome for you. But that's not often possible at the farm level. It's possible much more at a regional level, a watershed level, a state level, but it's very difficult on a farm level. And what do growers change on their farm? Growers change practices. That's how they advance. They change practices. So to get this kind of change, you've got to change practices here. So they're actually quite complementary, that the changes on the ground that the farmers do are going to have the change later on. So they can and should be complementary, and both show trends toward continual improvement. So it doesn't really matter to me if it is practice or metric-based or whatever. Things are complementary because the changes in practices should have changes in the metric. If not, I think the metric is probably wrong or the model's wrong somewhere. But again, the practice is a farm-based level with individual changes due to informed decision at the farm level or some research basis that's telling them that this practice change will help them. The metric, the national or regional focus on the big picture changes using models to predict a value for sustainability. So again, I think these are complementary, but there are some growing groups and regions that are being talked about metric-based. I will tell you, we talk about rice. Rice is being asked to do this field-to-market assessment, which is a metric-based assessment. But again, how does that change? It's going to change by practices, so it's something to look at. Am I okay on time? Okay. Examples of the research outcomes and the benefits. Can we develop on-farm demonstrations of desired practices? Yes, this is what we want to do. Why are we getting some benefit through the research outcome? Again, we can have on-farm demonstrations. We can compare the sustainable to these conventional type practices. And we can determine the changing criteria as a result of the practice. For example, one of the big buzzwords in sustainability is greenhouse gas emissions. Well, we know that for something like soybeans, changes in tillage practices or other crops, changes in tillage practices has a huge effect on the greenhouse gas emissions. So again, that's the practice and the outcome. So research helps us determine that really on the ground. How are these protocols sustainable? I should be asking you guys this after we're done. You should come up with this list. But if we really look at how are we sustainable by using these protocols, they are going to encourage continual improvement, which is a tenet of sustainability. They can be used as an educational tool. As I mentioned before, they work in conjunction with local experts and research-based faculty, local needs, local regional priorities. They give credibility to the current ag programs and help prioritize new research areas or new needs. We can look at documenting improvements already made. A lot of times we can look back at national data or industry-specific data they may have from 5 to 10 years ago and look at this as a public marketing tool. What are some of these key drivers of sustainability? What are some of these key drivers that they've already changed and how that might affect outcomes? As I mentioned before, we can consolidate sustainability documentation, hopefully under one protocol. We can help eliminate some of the surveys they're asked for. And we can, Mike, I'll get to your question in a second. And we can document economic sustainability by determining key drivers and cost of changes in implementation over time. Mike Weller, who's a pork producer here in Wisconsin, says, how important is food security to the sustainability discussion? That is a great question. I'd love to have the students answer that before, but I'm going to answer real quickly. And the truth is food security is a big buzzword right now, and that's basically two things, food safety and the health and benefits of that, but also food accessibility. And a lot of people don't think of that in the sustainability discussion, but it's very true, and especially if you look at some of the urban markets, food accessibility is very difficult. So food security, maintaining a healthy, well-secure, available food chain and food supply is something that's very important, and I think that is a big issue in the animal ag end. So good question. If you have any more questions, keep typing there. Example criteria. Now I'm going to get to some of the, and actually I'm glad you brought this up, Mike, because food security is going to be under the criteria that we talk about. When we're writing a protocol or we're thinking of developing a protocol for your cropping system and stuff, what should be under these kind of protocols? Well, as I mentioned before, one of the NISA's approaches is they're balanced. They need to incorporate all the aspects of sustainability that are there, the economic, environmental, and social. It needs to be balanced. It can't be all put on somebody's back, one back, or it can't be all on one end. Obviously, some of the the environmental ones are going to be more important, but or not necessarily more important, that's not the right word, there will be more questions because there's more research about that, but it still needs to be balanced. There's no specific template that we want you to use, but it must include the priorities most important to the region and the cropping system. I think that's the key, and this is why having the growers at the table, the growers involved from the very beginning will help you that. An example of that, the environment might be the most important thing in one region, while social issues are the most important things in other regions. If you compare this to something like some of the California agriculture where they have a lot of the worker issues, that's a big issue compared to here when we don't really have as much of that issue. But that doesn't mean one is more important than the other. They all still need to be there. They need to be balanced, but they're just criteria to look at when you're developing these. If we look at the three elements of sustainability, I'm going to shoot these up closer in a second, but we've got the social, environmental, and economic components. Again, I want you to be balanced. I want you to look at all these. But what are some of the specific things we can look at under each of those? If we look at under the social criteria, another thing I want you to see is that some of these overlap in the middle. There's a lot of these criteria that you're going to do that you might not necessarily go over one area, like the energy criteria. They really encompass all of them, social, economic, and environmental. But here's some of the ideas of social factors: human resources, waste management, recycling, community involvement, maintaining lands and farming, land use pressure, food security, all these things that could be under there. Energy, knowledge of energy and fuel uses, efficiency improvements, alternative energy sources, bioenergy investments. These are just examples, but they're ideas of criteria that can be under various concepts. Economic, again, I've got energy under that again, because economic and energy goes together quite well for growers. But for growers specifically, you look at economics, the cost of production and net returns, working with a financial or business advisor, insurance and disaster planning, farm succession, long-term sustainability of the land. As we look here in Madison, you'll see that as Madison grows and grows and grows, the farming gets smaller, smaller, smaller. The farming that's left has to be much more productive on less land. But that's how they are sustainable, by increasing their productivity on the smaller amount of land. Examples of environmental criteria. And these, again, are just examples, but ideas that you can put down or think about as you're developing your systems. Ecosystems, knowledge of the general principles of ecosystems. Invasive species management. These are just ideas, and I will say a lot of these are written more for Wisconsin than some other regions, so it's something to think about. Utilizing ecological science in planning. Developing ecological restoration sites. Just some ideas. Soil and water quality. Developing conservation plans, fertility management, using BMPs, best management practices. Water management and adopting advanced new techniques. General pest management, scouting for pests, keeping records, accurate pest identification, use of biologically based pest management strategies. These are kind of some of the examples I showed earlier. General production, record keeping, plant health, pesticide safety, various things. The reason I wanted to show you this is to just give you kind of an overview of the variety of things that we're talking about here. I'm glad Mike brought up food security. That was an important concept too. But it gives you an idea that there's a lot that the growers have to think about. It's not just it's coming up till March and April, we should think about planting. And there's lots of things to think about. There's things to think about all year long. Sustainability is a process. It's not a destination. But as we're working with the growers and the grower industry groups, we want to make sure that we have all these ideas in there. So again, what we're really talking about in this class and what we're talking about today is this Tier 1 entry-level self-assessment process. Keys again. Let's begin developing a balanced approach for sustainability. Let's keep it easy, no trade secrets. Let's get something out of it. Let's make sure we get something out of it, the growers get something out of it, the industry gets something out of it. And it occurs, changes over time, and it's something that is going to engage producers. It's something that's not going to scare producers away. It's going to engage producers, and it's going to help in the agricultural sustainability down the line. Making your own protocols when you start working on them. No set standard or needs. Remember the criteria of NISA. It's producer-led, research-driven, regionally appropriate. What we have made and used so far may be valuable and may or may not be valuable for other regions or other commodity crops. I will say that we kind of have an approach we've used. Definitely we have an approach that started back when we were looking at healthy grown, but nothing has been the same. It's not something that we've taken and kind of just copied and pasted. Things have gotten easier and we've gotten more efficient at them, no question about it, but we haven't had a duplicate of what we've done. Everything has its own flavor, everything has its own differences, and that always happens when you sit down with the growers and the industry at the table, that they've got what their needs is. Animal Ag right now has developed a very shortened version, Introduction to Sustainability. It has gotten groups engaged. It's been very effective. Sarah Collier has worked on coming up kind of with a shortened version, and it's been something that's very effective, and it's not something we've used before. So again, something that might be appropriate and useful to the grower groups is something you really need to discuss. Be creative. I don't want something just copied off the internet that somebody else has done. We need to be a little more creative than that. I remember the key, substance over style. This is really the whole point of this talk. If it's just a piece of paper, it will be found out. This is what's happened a lot in national sustainability discussions right now, is there's really no substance behind it. It's somebody sitting on a desk of a shareholder group, or if it's somebody in DC or somebody in some academic tower that just is coming up with something that really has no on-the-ground validity, no real substance to it, it never gets anywhere, and it's found out very quickly. If it has research value, basis, and ability to improve, then it will pass the test. When we were developing Healthy Ground, this was many years ago, back even when we started in 2000, we said this has to be able to get through the 60 minutes approach. If somebody's going to come and say, 60 Minutes starts interviewing us, does this have real substance behind it? We're going to be able to say yes. And we can show them the years of documentation. We can show them the years of research and all the value behind it and all the things that we can do with it. So that is really important to it. It has to have this value behind it, this substance behind it. It needs to be valuable to the growers, to the industry, and to the supply chain. We don't want the supply chain dictating it, but we want to make sure that they find it valuable as well. So with that, that's really what I had for today. I'll take questions even from the group online. Deana, are you supposed to stop recording?